Also coming up in the programme, Jeremy Corbyn says he hasn't ruled out giving the Scottish Parliament the power to hold a second independence referendum if he becomes Prime Minister. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he hasn't ruled out giving the Scottish Parliament the power to hold a second independence referendum if he becomes Prime Minister. Mr Corbyn told BBC Scotland that he'd decide at the time. He also dismissed the idea that a Labour government could hold another EU referendum, a warning that Nick Eardley's report contains flash photography.
A Prime Minister in waiting? Jeremy Corbyn's team thinks so. That chaos at Westminster could mean Labour in government. And soon. That would mean Mr Corbyn has some big decisions to make. Earlier this year, Theresa May refused to give Nicola Sturgeon the power to hold another independence referendum. But Jeremy Corbyn says he hasn't ruled it out.
We'd obviously decide at the time, but I'd simply point out that the spending problems in Scotland are a 13 billion gap between what Scotland can raise through taxation and what it gets at the moment as income. And I point out the economic issues that have got to be centrepiece to part of it. Things will be very different in Scotland with an ally in Westminster like a Labour government.
Let me be clear, you're not ruling out allowing the power for the Scottish Parliament to hold another referendum?
I'm not ruling out, I'm just pointing out the reality of it.
Because your last manifesto at the Scottish Parliament did rule out
Look,
another
we
referendum.
don't want another referendum, we don't think another referendum is a good idea, and we'll be very clear on why we don't think it's a good idea.
Some in the Labour Party might be frustrated at those comments. They think that Jeremy Corbyn has been too equivocal on the issue of another independence referendum. But there's another area where the Labour leadership has been fairly ambiguous too, and that's on calls for another vote on EU membership.
Yeah. Thumbs up, everybody.
The Labour leader has to tread a fine line. He'd prefer a general election if Parliament rejects any deal the government reaches. And then?
We will negotiate immediately with Brussels on a trade and a customs arrangement with the European Union so that we'd have that close relationship.
You would definitely leave?
The referendum made that decision. Our position is we want to have an effective, good relationship with Europe which protects rights as well as trade. It's not just about trade.
I mean, that all but rules out the idea that there could be another referendum under a Labour government.
We're not proposing another referendum. I understand many people are, but there are also many versions of what that referendum would be, which could be actually more complicated.
That route to Brexit will leave some disappointed, but with key parts of Scotland's future at a crossroads, Jeremy Corbyn wants to decide the next turn. Nick Eardley, reporting Scotland, Westminster.